Year 12. Today I've got a special guest on the video who I just happen to live with. So please welcome Mr Vose.
Hey guys, what's going on?
Mr Vose has got loads of experience with NEAs, so I thought it would make sense for us to work together to guide you through both the original writing and the investigation. So we're going to set it up interview style. The questions will be on the PowerPoint and you can listen to our answers and jot down notes. Feel free to pause us if we are speaking too fast, but it will probably just be me. Okay, so we're going to start with the original writing. So the first question is, what do you think Mr Vose, the exam board, are looking for with the original writing?
The primary thing they're looking for is a sufficient level of challenge in the piece that you produce. There is a tendency for a lot of students to try to do things like magazine articles or to do a news article or to write a basic speech. Very GCSE style tasks, things that you would get in your average AQA or EDUCAS GCSE paper. Now the problem with those text types is they don't really provide a lot of challenge in terms of the linguistic choices that you're making as you construct the text. So you want to choose something that's going to be very challenging. Very challenging, then immediately the thing that might be kind of going through your skull is, oh well, it's going to have to be an editorial, isn't it, for like The Guardian? It's going to have to be a broadsheet editorial, or it's going to have to be like a really challenging piece of literature writing, like in the style of the Gothic.
And sorry, for editorial, do you mean like an opinion piece?
Like an opinion piece, yeah. But really, challenge comes in. Remember that they're looking for you to adapt or adopt a style of writing in a particular genre. So challenge could be that you say, okay, I'm going to write a children's story. So you might be thinking now, oh, that's not very challenging. But actually, it's very, very challenging to write stories for children because you've got to get the syntactic choices and the lexical choices just right. The content's got to be appropriate. Coming up with the good stories is really hard. I think if I keep talking, I'm going to go on to things which was actually your next question. The other thing that they want you to, they're looking for is a quality style model. So they want, if you're not sure what I mean by a style model, you choose an example of the type of thing you want to create. Now, they're also looking for that style model. You shouldn't just be copying it. It shouldn't be that you get a style model for a Guardian op-ed. Sorry to keep going back to the Guardian. It's quite a common task that a lot of students do. Is like a Guardian or an independent op-ed opinion editorial piece. But let's say you get a Guardian op-ed on I don't know, on Boris Johnson's failure to manage COVID-19. Okay. You wouldn't then produce your own op-ed on another of Boris Johnson's failures because the tasks are far too similar. Your style model should give you a sense of the style you're trying to imitate, but the content by and large should actually be very different, or as different as it can be while staying within the same genre. The only other thing I'd say in terms of...
Sorry, before you move on, I do think that's worth emphasising because there have been times in the past where students haven't had that distinguishing factor. And I have had to say to them, you're going to have to go and find a different style model. So please do make sure that you have got some element of difference there. And obviously your topic is the easiest thing to change.
And then the only other thing I'd say is that that they do really appreciate they do really appreciate variety. They like to see students doing different things. So I've already mentioned that a lot of students tend to do op-ed pieces, opinion editorials in the style of a broadsheet. So that can get quite repetitive, especially when the truth is that a lot of students tend not to do it hugely well. Try and build variety into the task. It'll reflect well on you as a student for coming up with something a bit more original, because that's kind of the point. It's original writing. It will reflect well on Miss Bird in the centre, because it will be clear that they are giving you the freedom to do what you want, rather than kind of pigeonholing you, which some centres do, like exam factory centres where They just want to get you the best possible grade, and they don't care about like your learning journey, etc. They will pigeonhole you into just doing an op-ed or into doing a genre piece of writing, and everybody in the class will be doing pretty much the same thing. And it's great that you're not being forced to do that. So take the opportunity to produce something a little bit more original. I'll talk more about original ideas on the next slide, I guess.
Yeah, we'll move on to the next question. Okay, so if you could give us some examples of the 3 different categories you can use for writing that you've seen that you think are really good.
Okay, so the exam board gives tasks and gives kind of 3 options for your original writing. It's the power of persuasion, it's the power of information, and it's the power of storytelling. So there is a rough division there between then to persuade, to inform, and to entertain. Okay, so in terms of the power of persuasion, what you're really thinking about is there's a vast range of text types that you could create there. What tends to be most successful are things with very clearly defined goals in terms of persuasion. So a bad example would be like an article convincing people to stop smoking. One of the problems with that is that it's too simple. It's the kind of thing that you could be asked to do at GCSE. Another problem with it, it's really quite vague. Like, who's your audience? Smokers. Like, what does that mean, etc. Better examples of a writing to persuade task is something like a letter to an MP. So producing a letter to an MP to say increase funding for parking allocation, save the Sefton Park Meadows. You get the idea. I'm not coming up with many great ideas for write and persuade because it's a fairly rare task. Most students tend to focus on power of information and power of storytelling.
A couple of good ones I've seen are actually speeches. So last year somebody did a speech about abortion and trying and persuading sort of pro-choice with regards to abortion, and that had a really clearly defined audience because she was going to present this speech at a conference. And the year before last we had a similar one where it was again a speech at a feminism conference, so there was a very clear defined audience, and you could add in, adapt the language for the context of the fact that you're introducing a conference and you're sort of heading up a weekend, and obviously people are going to be interested in the topic that you're trying to persuade them on. So they're 2 really good examples I've seen in the last few years.
Another example of writing to persuade, pamphlets can be a good choice. I've never actually known a student to try it, but it would be really good. If you're not sure what I mean, but you probably think pamphlet, you think leaflet. Pamphleteering in the traditional sense is a kind of rich kind of genre with a good historical background in England. If you think back in the days before radio and television, if you wanted to get a message out broadly and publicly, you would hand out pamphlets, and these pamphlets wouldn't just be kind of like a few words on them, they'd be quite rich texts. So you could produce a kind of modern day pamphlet with an audience of, say, people living around Sefton Park, to convince them to boycott an event in Sefton Park, for example. Or you could even go so far as to go back historically, get an example of an historical pamphlet from early modern or late modern English in the style of, say, Jonathan Swift, and try to produce...
I don't know Jonathan Swift yet, we do that next year.
And try to produce it. As well, on that point of Jonathan Swift, something else at the exam board look for, they look for interesting tones and interesting use of kind of arguments and ideas. So Jonathan Swift wrote A Modest Proposal, which if you go and have a read of it, it's not a long read. It'll take you about half an hour to read it, I would say. If you're not familiar with it, it's this very satirical, sarcastic proposal as a solution to poverty and overpopulation and problems with food in the 18th century, and he suggested that poor people should sell their babies to the rich to be eaten and to be made into shoes and clothing, which I know sounds horrific, but he wasn't being serious. He's being quite satirical, and the point was actually to underscore that if the rich have money to buy babies to eat, they actually have money to give away. So that clever argument in that pamphlet is an example of like an interesting approach that an exam board would really value. I'm not encouraging you to go write articles about eating babies, to be clear. I'm saying try and come at it from an interesting angle.
Yeah, I think that's worth highlighting. Don't feel you can persuade something you don't actually believe in. And sometimes taking a quite radical view of something can make for a more interesting piece of writing. Somebody this year kind of went down a Katie Hopkins approach, and they hated Katie Hopkins, but it actually made for a really entertaining piece of writing.
So writing to inform, or the power of information.
I've not really seen many of these.
The reason we don't see many of these is they tend to be texts that students think are boring. They tend to be things that students are like, well, that's really boring. But
I probably teach that. That's the problem.
It's not a question of boredom. It's a question of are you imitating a particular style. So I know, for example, writing a Lonely Planet travel guide might not sound like the sexiest thing to do in terms of this task. But actually, if you look at Lonely Planet travel guides, or a chapter of a Lonely Planet travel guide, they are really interesting kind of texts in the way they're constructed and the way they're built, particularly as well in terms of imitating the style and using subheadings and images and the quite concise way that they try to express themselves. So travel guides, food blogs, so blogging on like a local restaurant that's opened, for example.
That's a good one because it's quite difficult to get the vocabulary to really pin down descriptions of food, isn't
Absolutely.
it? So there's a really unique style to that.
And nailing your interaction with an audience in a blog as well, because remember, when you have a blog, a successful blog caters to a niche audience, generally speaking. There are very few blogs that have a general purpose audience. You get the big audience by focusing on a small audience, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So if you were to do, say, if you were to imagine that you had a blog on drumming, for example, okay, then you'd be thinking, my audience of drummers, and what vocabulary am I going to use to engage an audience of drummers? In say, like, I don't know, a blog-based review of a drum kit, of a new drum kit. On that point, reviews are writing to inform. A lot of students make the mistake of thinking that it's power of persuasion. It's not. When you write a review, you're not selling a product, you're not telling them to go watch the movie, you're informing them of your opinion, your thoughts. Reviews are a nice choice, especially if you really, really love film or music, because they are quite complicated text to produce properly. I know this might come... Or food, yeah. I know this might conflict with what I said to you before about avoiding GCSE tasks, but honestly, when GCSE students do reviews, they do tend to be a bit pants sometimes. You're looking at spending hours and hours and hours trying to imitate the style of, say, I don't know, Mark Commode or a Rolling Stone review. On that point, don't get entrenched as well in doing... Don't get entrenched in thinking, oh, it has to be written texts. Your writing to inform text could be the script for a radio review, or it could be the script for a YouTube essay. If any of you have are into any YouTube essayists out there, I can't think of any film-based ones off the top of my head right now.
Chris Stuckman? Would he count as an essayist?
He's not really. He does have. Chris Stuckman does have some essays. I'm thinking like Mark. So not a film one, but like if you look at Mark, I think it's Mark Brown, GMTK. He makes video games, but he does these video essays on like video game design. So they are very informative. But the point there is that you're actually the challenge there would be in writing. You won't make the video, to be clear. You'd write the script that would go with the video, and the challenge there is then to think about your use of deixis and your understanding of what would be on the screen at this time, and how does your language interact with the fact that this would be a multimodal text.
And drawing on those trends of language that have emerged. There is a bit of a niche language now, isn't there, to YouTubers? Yeah.
Things to avoid for writing to inform generally don't work very well, are the really most very boring types of informative text. I've had students who've tried to do things like encyclopedia entries, for example, and they just tend not to be great because encyclopedia entries are so very straightforward. If you've got a real passion for something that might be in an encyclopedia, I would, for example, think about instead of doing something like kind of like an atlas-based entry. So I'm just thinking off the top of my head, like I've got an atlas of world beers on the shelf over there, and it is a reference to tone, but it's something that's written with a little bit more kind of panache and verve than your average Encyclopedia Britannica entry. So if you say, for example, are really, really into fashion and you want to do like an entry on a particular fashion trend that's out at the moment, think about it as like as an entry in an atlas rather than in a very straightforward encyclopedia.
Yeah. For writing to storytell or entertain, I always feel that I tend to get more band 5 pieces out of this one, especially if they're written by people who are readers. Like if you read a lot of literature and you love a particular genre of writing, fiction writing, then you tend to be able to sort of write a really good piece of creative writing from it. If you're not a reader, maybe I'd recommend it slightly less. But I do think the mark scheme lends itself a little bit more to being able to. It just seems to be that the people who choose the last one are more likely to get those top marks, in my experience. Do you come to that? Agree or?
I'd agree, but I think there's a little bit of bias in there. I would say it tends to get the top marks because our top students are also readers.
Yeah.
So it's that question of like if you are someone who reads a lot and really loves, say, a particular genre, as Miss Bird has already said, then by all means try to produce a storytelling task as an imitation of that genre.
Just make sure the topic is different.
I would say the challenge there, though, is in finding a different plot.
Yeah.
So I very often get students who really love, I don't know, dystopian fiction, and they want to write a dystopian piece, or they like horror or thrillers, but when they actually come up with writing their own plot for a chapter, it tends to be a little bit wishy-washy. The plot needs to be good, even if it's just for that one chapter. It can't be vague what's going on. It has to be a clear plot and a sense of development. You can produce short stories. They tend to be the most very challenging. A good short story is a very, very difficult thing to master. And I tend not to recommend them for the most part, because the other problem with a short story is you've got to think about sustaining that tone across an entire story and tying it up neatly. It's often easier just to think, all right, I'm going to write the second chapter of an imaginary book.
Yeah. Extract from a novel is definitely the best way, because even your audience is easier to pin down.
Yeah.
We don't live in a society that particularly values the short story anymore, do we?
No. It's very narrow, though. There are other things you can do with storytelling. You can do dramatic monologues in the style of Alan Bennett. So if you get on YouTube and Google some talking heads clips, that'll be some examples of dramatic monologues for you. And you can also produce movie scripts or television scripts. And the challenge there comes in nailing the graphology and the typographical choices, for example, and achieving the correct register.
And I have done a screenwriting unit as part of my master's, so I have got screenwriting programs and things, so I could help you out if you wanted to do that. I was going to say one more thing about that. I think one of the things that lends itself really well with an extract from a novel is the opportunity to sort of use that idea of focalization or editing your dialogue, and thinking about who, like switching between which character you focalized on and things like that, give you an opportunity to get some really good commentary marks, because I think when you're shaping a narrative, all of the linguistic choices that you make we're used to already discussing. It's something that we would naturally, you've been doing it since high school. It's very easy to think, well, what am I writing in first, second, or third person? Am I writing in past, present, future tense? And then obviously all the impact, how that impacts on your grammar and your lexis. I think that's another reason why it's quite a nice one to do, and you're more used to discussing that than how you structure an article, aren't we?
I think Miss Bird here is really heavily leaning into asking you to do.
Oh, I'm not.
Storytelling
It's Miss Carney's side as well. I won't even be marking them, but sorry. You do whatever you want, guys. We'll move on. Don't look like I'm dragging you in. So common mistakes.
So we've already touched on a few of these. The main mistakes are not choosing something challenging enough. Okay, so time can be really wasted there by not choosing a challenging enough task.
And this is where you need to keep talking to Miss Carney and keep sharing your ideas with her. Don't do loads of work without getting it checked.
Other common mistakes, they start writing before they've chosen a style model. Because if you do that, you're going to have to. Some students get really excited, particularly with the storytelling tasks. They're like, "Oh, I want to write my story," and then they choose a style model after. And what we realise when you're trying to write your commentary is these are not similar at all. Make sure that you have picked a quality style model and that you have studied and annotated that before you try to start writing.
Because it's very difficult to blag it in your commentary. Like, you should be writing your original piece using the style model. You should be making a conscious decision. I'm going to keep this linguistic feature. I'm going to get rid of that one. I'm going to edit this one. I'm going to change this because it works better in my context. They're conscious decisions you may need to make as you write. And if you don't, then when you come to do your commentary, it's going to be very difficult, and they're worth equal marks.
And a third common mistake I would say is, again, it's something we've actually already touched on. It's making your original writing too similar to the style model.
Yeah.
I.e., it's got the same topic, it's got exactly the same layout, the same discourse structure, the same register. You need to build in differences. It helps with your commentary, and it also means that you're using the clue is in that it's called a style model. It is a model for what your work should look like. It is not a blueprint. It's not that you should be copying that thing exactly. Other common mistakes, not taking the time to proofread it.
Yeah, that's why I was going to say spag, because there's a very clear defined line on the mark scheme, isn't there, about the number of errors you're allowed to get into a band 3, band 4.
You can tank your marks just by not taking the time to proofread.
Yeah.
Proofreading as well does not mean clicking spell checker and letting it do it for you, because spell checkers these days, they're getting better, but they still struggle contextually. Like they might think a comma goes there, but when you actually read it, the comma doesn't belong there, for example.
I would recommend printing it as well. Like, when I was at uni doing journalism, I lost loads of marks because I wrote the wrong past, as in P-A-S-T rather than P-A-S-S-E-D. And because I've proofread it on the computer, your eye just glances over it because it's the right word. If you print it off and go through it line by line, you're more likely to pick up errors. I would also say another common mistake is losing track of your audience, especially with like non-fiction pieces.
Yeah.
Often the EVI I have to give after a draft is I can't see how you've structured your text or how you've used specific vocabulary with your audience in mind. That's really, really important. Think about everything we analyse for representations. You're doing that backwards. So all the contextual factors that we take into account of, that shaped the writer's language, this is your opportunity to make those decisions for yourself.
And last little thing I would say is making sure that you don't make the commentary like the sad little left out of the task. A lot of students spend a lot of time choosing, annotating the style model, and then writing it, and then the commentary is an afterthought. Just remember, the commentary is worth 25 marks, and the original writing is worth 25 marks. So I've had students who've nailed original writing and got 24 out of 25, and then for the commentary they've got 10 and 11 marks because they've not put the time into doing that properly. So ultimately, as proud as they were of their original writing, they still ended up with like a C grade for the task overall, or like a B grade. So just make sure that you spend a lot of time on your commentary.
I would add on as well, you will be asked to do a bibliography at the end, and I'll reference reading material that you've read. It's especially if you, sorry to return to fiction and storytelling again, but if you've chosen a genre, do some reading about that genre and quote that in your bibliography or your references at the end, so that you've got that kind of you're showing that you've taken the time to really explore the thing that you're trying to write. The other thing I think students do is they don't annotate the STAR model. There's quite a few in the past where I've had them handed in and everything else is done, but the STAR model is still not annotated. It's really important that you use all the terminology and ideas that we've studied for representations and pick apart your STAR model at every linguistic level. So your lexis, your semantics, your discourse, your grammar, phonology if it's relevant, discourse, and pick apart all of those different features, because you should be making conscious decisions about your choices at all of those different levels as well. So please do it before you start writing.
And finally, just have some fun with it. Another mistake that students
Don't
make
forget.
is not having fun with it, because if you don't enjoy what you're writing about, then you're going to struggle to do it well. Try and choose something that you care about, and again, talk carefully with your mentor, or your NEA tutor, I should say, about what it is that you like.
Yeah, and I think there's options. You can do that by emailing Miss or going on Microsoft Teams, etc. Okay, I feel like we've kind of covered this, haven't we, in terms of, is there anything that you would add?
I would just say, look at several STAR models. Don't come across like, I'm going to do a review, and then you go to totalfilm.com and you pull up a review and you go, okay, job's done.
Yeah.
Right? You want to pull up several different reviews. You want to compare them. You want to read them and think, which one do I enjoy the most? Which one do I think I'm most capable of kind of aping and copying? And really take the time to absorb several STAR models. Do some research into what it is that you're writing about. Like, please don't try and write a review of Avengers Endgame when you watched it once last year and you've never gone back to it ever again. You need to be knowledgeable about whatever it is that you're going to be producing, and talk with friends and family about the task.
Yeah, that's a nice idea. Okay, I think we've covered this a bit already, but I think it's just worth emphasising that it is a comparison essay. You are comparing the style model to the choices that you made. Now, I know we've not done a lot of comparison this year and we didn't do it for representation, so this is something that you are going to need to take your time on and focus on. Is there anything else that you would add on for the commentary?
I try to take a methodical approach as much as you can, like work through your language levels, and like ultimately it's 750 words, isn't it? So that's not a lot of space to write in. You're not going to be producing an exhaustive essay. You want to think about one or two lexical choices that you felt were really significant to your piece and why you chose them and how that was influenced by the style model. And then one or two grammatical choices. Make it meaningful. Don't get bogged down in like wishy-washy stuff like sentence structure, for example.
Yeah.
Like a lot of students write about, I used complex sentences, and it's like, yeah, but was that a conscious choice? Did you sit there thinking, I'm going to use a compound complex sentence right now with a fronted adverbial? Like, we don't do that. No writers really do that, generally speaking, unless they're like real kind of galaxy brain type writers. So comment on the things that are really meaningful. Comment on the things where you deliberately made a choice. Very often, your choices will actually be in the redraft. Yeah, when you're redrafting your original writing, that's where you'll go, maybe this word would be better here, or maybe actually it would be better for me to use an imperative here instead of a declarative. Like, so try and it's actually good as well. Another approach to the commentary: keep a little log of what you change as you write, and then think about why you changed it. And that can go into your commentary.
That's one of the things we advise as well, that when you write your original writing, you write it on the left-hand side of a Word document, and on the right-hand side, you can keep notes of what's gone through your head. And that is essentially almost a draft of your commentary, isn't it? Then that you can kind of use as a starting point. I think it's just worth reiterating that as you are discussing your choices, you do need to be linking back to the style model, and you need to be using context to justify your choices. So if you've imitated something from the style model, use context to justify that. If you've gone against it, if you've refused to use it, you've used a different word or a different grammatical whatever, then you need to again justify that with regards to context. Anything else? Okay, I think that takes us to the end of original writing. So we'll start the video there and we will join you again for the investigation.